grace because, oh, thank you. I really love that prayer because it says when we focus our thoughts on God, that alone brings our healing. So friends, I have the great pleasure of emceeing this evening. Many of you have been here. I recognize your beautiful faces. I'll introduce our speaker, but if you could have yourselves on mute, and then I'll let Mr. Naylor run the presentation as he likes, whether it's questions at the end, but we are recording. So just to let you know about that. And if you're ever looking for these recordings, past recordings can be viewed on the Oakville Baha'is YouTube channel. It's a simple search for Oakville Baha'is. The topic this evening is enlightenment in the face of aggression. Gord, you must have chosen that topic. It's perfect, it's relevant, and here we are. So I'll read the description. It says, the struggle of rising to a spiritual level that transcends misuse of power and even abuse is complex, yet we're challenged by our Creator to transcend. Others expect many things from us, and we are able to be masters of our life. It is possible. Join us as we explore the path with Mr. Gordon Naylor. As many of you know, Mr. Naylor has been instrumental in creating, developing, and successfully implementing programs for the education and empowerment of youth and families. He has completed graduate studies in international education, clinical psychology, and educational administration. He is president and CEO of several companies and has lectured extensively throughout the world on education and moral leadership. So there's his bio, but beyond that, those who have the opportunity to hear Gord speak universally are moved, new thoughts come to our mind, we feel enkindled. Gord approaches serious topics with, a lot of humor and insight and relevant experience. And I always come away moved. One thing I learned about Gord very recently is that he can rap. He doesn't have a big repertoire. I think it's a one-sentence rap, if I'm not mistaken. And I was treated to that one-sentence rap last week. But the thing that confused me was he said he learned to rap to encourage other school principals to do the same. So I think it's a pretty high standard to be a school principal and to have to rap. So Gord, you might have to clear that up. But without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Maureen. I was forced on stage on Saturday night to rap, as I was forced when I was in the Caribbean on a service program and on many service programs. And it was the result of Kareem Rushdi's, mischief, I guess we'd call it, where he called me up and then said I was going to rap in a competition between myself and the other principal that was in the audience while 500 or 600 people are looking at us. So I had to come up with something. It was a very tense moment. So I reached back into my saying, which is I really couldn't have done any more. But actually it led to them participating and taking part. And of course, their students were just delighted that they would do that. So that's really how the rapping began. And I have thought since my performance on Saturday night, I should actually get some lessons in how to do this and become a little bit more substantial, because I think it might have been disappointing what they saw from me on Saturday night. But, they were very encouraging to me, which was great.
Not at all, Gord. It was thrilling and surprising.
Okay, that's great. So tonight's subject is actually a subject that came as a result of my consultation back and forth with Firuzanday, and also Miriam was involved in trying to think of a subject that really people are dealing with all kinds of extremely difficult things at this time. I'm presently up at Wildfire with the entire band of students of the school, and we're creating artistic pieces about on the theme of culture creates. That ultimately are if we're building strong community and we're doing the thing God wants us to do, then of course we will be able to create a lot of beautiful things, because out of culture comes art and music and all of the things that make life a joy and make us happy. And so in this environment of culture creates, at the same time in the evenings, I'm managing to watch global news about the horrific things that are happening in the Ukraine, that really probably most of us didn't think that we would have to ever see that, and certain images that are so unfortunate and so tragic that it's hard for us to function, especially if we really think of ourselves as family and we know what's happening to our family over there, and we know that this, brutal barbarism is something that is beyond our imagination. And I was mentioning to the students yesterday about that very subject, that when Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, was talking to Enoch Kalinga and spent quite a bit of time trying to educating him, not trying, but educating him as a hand of the cause of God, who really his task was to promote the cause of God, which we know is the cause of universal peace. And I always like to say that when we say the cause that we're talking about is the oneness of humanity, the cause of universal peace. That is the cause and purpose of the Baha'i faith. We live, in a sense, a Baha'i is to live their life for the oneness of humanity, to raise up a new civilization. And so, this cause is such an important cause, and anything that detracts from our oneness or our family, that diminishes any soul within, our purview, these are not the things that we want to be part of. In fact, we want to do everything to actually not necessarily oppose it directly, but oppose it with a stronger thought of something greater about the noble nature of humanity. And so that's always our struggle of how to do this. And when Shoghi Effendi was talking to Enoch Kalinga, I think I've mentioned that before when we've talked here, that he was talking to him about how when beings from the next world were to look at our progress on Earth, they would consider us barbaric. And Enoch Kalinga was offended by that, and offended in the sense that he didn't like to think of humanity as barbaric. And he asked the guardian why, and he said, because you're still killing people over land. You kill each other for land and for earth. And how could that possibly be? And I think, when you think about what all the religions of the world have said about human beings, where our soul is likened to a gem of inestimable value, and our reality as a human being is a noble nature, which means that what does nobility mean? And I think that's comes into our subject. Nobility has to do with us being courteous and of a high standard in relationship to each other. But nobility is something that is inherent in us. It's not something that somebody gives to us. We're born with this nobility. We're born with this capacity to demonstrate qualities like the qualities of God. And this birthright, which is the cause of our happiness, whenever we are able to demonstrate any of the wonderful qualities that are part of that nobility, it's the cause of our happiness, and it brings delight to each other. And so when we decide instead to use our will, which is, it's interesting because in this life we have this free will. We have this will to either demonstrate something that is virtuous and uplifting, or demonstrate something that is degrading and ignoble. And every moment of the day, really, we are making those choices. We're making the choices: am I going to do the noble thing, or am I going to do the negative thing? And that's what the individual is dealing with. But then we're in a world that is doing things that are hard for us to deal with. And, you know, Baha'u'llah says, sorrow not if things contrary to your wishes have been ordained on this earthly plane, for days of blissful joy are in store for you. So we know that things are happening in the world, or may even happen to us, that we would never want to happen to anyone. They could be very, very traumatic things. And in my work, I deal with children and youth who have had horrific things done to them. And when you think about children in that condition that are subjected to these horrific things, and then your job or your task is to help them once again kind of believe in the humanity of the world when they're in a condition having been deprived of, you know, things that I don't even want to talk about, but, you know, being deprived of basic love and care and the capacity to build trust with other adults. It's a very complicated thing. And for me, it was very challenging, as it would be for any of us, to try to figure out how to help legitimately people who have, let's say, seen the side of life that is not a side of life that most people ever have to see, or should ever, you know, should ever have to see. And then figure out how to help them come from where they are to a place where they could begin to trust, or where they could begin to believe that things good could happen in the world to them or to others. And so when I thought about this subject, I thought, you know, well, actually, when I thought about it all these years, I really thought that the only way that we can really cope with what's going on and how to transcend is to understand that we are by our nature transcendent beings. We are not the sum of what has happened to us. We already have this inherent nobility. And what I've found really fascinating in the work that I've done is that when some child comes to me, or some youth, we engage them in their own treatment. You know, we engage them in their own healing process by discussing that with them, by listening to them, by helping them formulate possible goals that are realistic for them and work towards those goals, and see our role as kind of facilitating what they think they want to do and what they think they're trying to come to. And what's really fascinating to me is, even though somebody might have blighted their potential or prevented them from getting the things that they needed, it's fascinating that they are always the ones that actually know inherently within them what it is that they need to get well, to do better, to make progress. And so they don't really need somebody to tell them what to do. What they need is someone to help them see their own inherent nobility and demonstrate that you believe in their capacity. Now, maybe their judgment may not be exactly what we want, as any child's judgment or youth's judgment or even adult judgment isn't always what it should be. By consultation together, plan starts to formulate of the next steps we can take. And we can't take a lot of steps sometimes, but we can take some steps. And I feel like this process that God has given us to be able to consult together with this respect of the nobility of each person in order to transcend even the most horrific of things is really a gift. It's a gift from God. But we also have to believe that we're not the sum of what has happened to us. and that we're not by nature or by reality a victim. We are by nature and reality a noble being that transcends anything. Now, that doesn't mean we want to experience everything. We don't need to experience negative things in order to know that we're strong enough to overcome them. We don't need to have the independent investigation of darkness to know that it's darkness. We already know what it is. But, many of you would agree, I'm sure, that a lot of times we get into difficulties by us violating our own principles and ideas that we know to be true. And we may have a moment of weakness where we might do that. We might do something less than we know we should do. And, usually if we're honest with ourselves, we reflect on it, and then we can regroup and come back and be strong about it again. So I'm saying that, whether individually or with the help of others in consultation, we can plan steps of how we can transcend and become the noble beings and demonstrate the nobility. We are always noble beings, but demonstrate the nobility that we need to bring to a situation. We can demonstrate how to get to that high road. We can help each other to get to that high road. And so in big crisis or small crisis, the pattern is always kind of the same. When I first started working with children and youth and I saw the kinds of problems that they had, I used to think, okay, I need to go and study and figure out what it is that I need to learn in order to be able to help them. What could I give them or do for them? And then over time, it became really clear to me that what we have to help each other with is balance. We have to bring balance back into our lives. Any one of us can get unbalanced. And actually, others can cause us to get unbalanced. They can even force us to become unbalanced. They can force us to not even be able to hear our inner voice at times. And yet that voice is the voice that's going to be doing the healing. So it's interesting that in the Baha'i writings, it talks about how we have to be selfless. But then I think sometimes, it says, if you're feeling down and sad, then go and do something for someone else. Forget yourself, do something for someone else, and that'll be a step on the road to healing. However, we can go too far with forgetting ourselves and not looking after ourselves. And, to that end, I'd rather read this writing that says, with reference to what is meant by an individual becoming entirely forgetful of self, the intent is that he should rise up and sacrifice himself in the true sense. That is, he should obliterate the promptings of the human condition and rid himself of such characteristics as are worthy of blame and constitute the gloomy darkness of this life on earth. Not that he should allow his physical health to deteriorate and his body to become infirm. So in order to be of service, we have to look after ourselves as well. We have to make sure that our physical health doesn't deteriorate and that we don't deprive ourselves of the essential things that would allow us to be of service in the future. Some people kind of live their life as a comet coming through the air where they just blast it all out and then they're gone, and some people choose to live in a long, steady stream, maybe like a shooting star, maybe a falling star, because in the end, we all must fall from a physical point of view, but we rise from a spiritual point of view. You only ever rise when it comes to spiritual matters. Even when we have difficulties, we have to transcend those and then we rise up again. So we're talking about a process of how we, as our true nature is noble, that we have the capacity to make choices that demonstrate that in our own lives, that we have the capacity to live according to principles that allow us to stay safe and to contribute to the well-being of humanity. Many, many people think of rules or restrictions in religion and other things as somehow depriving us of freedom. But in actual fact, it's quite the opposite. When we live according to principles, and we guide our lives according to the teachings of God, then we protect our realities from so many things. Because of those choices, we don't find ourselves in environments that create difficulties. But this doesn't mean that that's always what happens. There are actually people are so demented that they actually seek out people like that to torment and misuse and prey on their good qualities. And so we can't be naive either, but we have to be always loving and firm and always working on the nobility of other people. And there's lots of examples where you might be called upon or asked for something which you know is not a good thing to give that other person. So you might have to find a creative way of helping them in another way that's better for them, and not assume that they necessarily should get what it is they're asking for, especially when it's not something that would be the best for them. This quotation says, "The ego is the animal in us, the heritage of the flesh, which is full of selfish desires. By obeying the laws of God, seeking to live the life laid down in our teachings, and prayer and struggle, we can subdue our egos. We call people saints who have achieved the highest degree of mastery over their egos." So when I said in that little introduction that you heard about, it's possible for us to be the master of our situation in our life, everyone's task really is to master their own ego, to subdue their own ego, and to recognize that if we have anything to offer, which every one of us does have, then we offer it in this wonderful spirit of service and love to others, even when they're taking advantage of us. You know, Abdu'l-Baha was heard to say that when somebody was, you know, he'd say, "Do you think I don't know what's happening here?" You know, but yet, even though I know, I still treat you with love. So he never allowed somebody to think that he was a fool, but their negative view of the world and humanity to diminish his contribution to the world. And that's another huge thing that we have to go over. You know, I'm going to say recently I had a chat with Ellen in the Next World, because I was feeling that she had not really come back to tell me whether any secrets about the next life. You know, like I'm thinking, you know, her and I were really quite close. So why is she not going to come and give me a hint or two about what's happening? I want some confirmation. I want to know something, you know. And then I thought, my second thought was, Ellen was never really like a rule breaker, you know. She wouldn't break the rules. So if she was up there and there's a rule against giving me hints, then she would just, you know, she just wouldn't do it. But then I still thought, Ellen was really smart, you know, so she could figure out a way to tell me without breaking the rule, don't you think? I mean, if you really think about it, you could probably. So this is my conversation I'm having in my head. And then, of course, I just forget about it all because I should be thinking about all this anyway. But I have to say, I really was thinking of it and I meant it. I expected something, even though she hasn't been too visible in my dreams, because I think she tells me I should get on with my business and she's got hers. So anyway, so I have a dream just after that. Honestly, it was the next day. But of course, she doesn't appear to me because she comes to me and I could feel her presence so strong. I wasn't seeing her, but the interesting thing was she was a very powerful, she was much more powerful than she was in real life. And you have to realize that's a lot of power because she had a lot in this life over my life for sure. And it wasn't the wrong kind of power, it was the right kind of power where she's always like a truing force, no matter what else happens. She, you know, she was absolutely truthful. And so she would, you know, in my dream, she comes in this powerful way, but all I could feel was a powerful Native woman, you know, indigenous woman. Like I felt like she was a powerful elder, and she laid out in front of me this blue shirt, and it was a blue indigenous Native man's shirt. And it had those ribbons, like the indigenous shirts. I don't know if you've seen them, and buttons, and they're sort of set out for, a presentation. And she says to me, this is how you have to present yourself. And I couldn't figure out what she meant. Like, was I supposed to wear blue? Was I, so because I'm kind of dense, she probably would have. I heard, but what does it mean? What does this mean? And she said, you're sorry. And I said, you're sorry? Yes, that's how you have to present yourself, that you're sorry. That's all she said. And I started thinking about what was she saying, and she was telling me, then these thoughts were unfolding in my dream, that I'm sorry that I have not done what it is that I could have done for God. That I'm sorry that I haven't served people the way that I could have. I'm sorry that maybe sometimes I might have thought I was smarter than other people, or, any thoughts that I had in relationship to anything. So I realized she was saying my whole demeanor has to be, some didn't like what I was doing, I should be sorry, because of course they're right. I didn't do it exactly in the way that could have been uplifting. And it actually was very freeing to me. Like, it made me feel really good. And I thought, I can do that. I can be sorry. That's something that she always felt I wasn't able to be, she said I let myself, I should feel guilty longer or something. She thought I should just, she thought I was very good at forgiving myself, is what she thought. And so she wanted to teach me I should wait a little longer before I forgive too fast. So now I thought, okay, this is great. I'd never have to worry about, because I'm always sorry. I'm just going to be sorry. That it's true. It's true. I felt it was very uplifting. And then I thought, in relationship to other human beings, if I really presented myself like I was never going to be an adequate friend to them or an adequate person to do service to them, we would have a great relationship, no matter who the person was. And because I never would think that, I could do them adequate service. There's a writing where Baha'u'llah says, and I remember reading this, where he said, if you were to wait at the door of a believer for as long as your life existed, in the hope you might render some service to them, and this because they're associated as a believer with God, you would not have rendered adequate service. That writing said. So I knew she was telling me something really big here. And then later I thought, oh, wait a second. She did find a way to tell me, because this is how Baha'u'llah wants us to present ourselves to each other. And these writings say that we are always the servant of everyone. There's no one else that is, more lowly than you are, than I am. And if I actually could, try to feel that as much as possible, and especially at those times when I thought I was something more than that, then relationships would change. But not because I'm going to let somebody walk on me, because I'm not, that doesn't make you a doormat, because that would not have been the best service if I let someone abusive, just as Abdu'l-Baha wouldn't let them do that. In fact, I would have to, because of my nobility and the expectation of God of what is the standard of relationship, I would have to call them to account if we are to continue. So just so you know, I got a text from someone, I won't say who and what, but it was a text that was telling me something that was not very nice. And so I texted them back and said, I don't think that the tone of your text is one that's working. And so I would think that maybe you're tired, or maybe you're hungry, or maybe you're just feeling emotionally not so great right now. So I'm going to just not text back until you can feel better and we can text the way we would like to text each other. And I thought this was a bold move. But immediately the person texts back apologies for what they had said and what they had done. And it wasn't that much. And then, of course, I said, no need for an apology, but I'm so happy that we can just talk as two noble beings together. And so I'm giving you that example because I'm not saying by the fact that we are, to present ourselves in a humble way, that we just let people do whatever they think they want to do, because that would not be fitting for them. It's more selfless for me to help them do a better job of that than for me to let them. If I let them, that's just saving me the embarrassment of having to say something when really I want a genuine good relationship with them. And so if I really love them and I really want a genuine relationship, we have to talk it out. And I think we can do that. There are situations when we don't have the capacity to deal with each other. And that might be situations that are abusive or dangerous or extreme, in which case I would say that we have to seek help to talk it out. And we might need someone else to help in order for us to sort it out and talk it out. And there's nothing, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing if you need assistance to work through things. And it's certainly a better thing than to allow some kind of ongoing abuse or deterioration in your relationship. So you do want to be able to think about the quality of your relationships and what you have, and then be able to make the changes you need to change. So, there is a possibility that maybe I'll just kind of conclude with this story. I might have told some of you this story before, but I feel like, a person told me once that if we could just teach to humanity one teaching, which is that we are each noble beings, that would transform all of humanity if they could actually understand what that means. And what it means, of course, is that we have this capacity to choose. And we're always choosing between vice or virtue. We're always choosing between something negative or something uplifting and positive. That's how we know the difference. And nobility means that we turn our attention to that which is virtuous and uplifting, no matter what the situation. And if we do that, we will be able to transform relationships. And over time, we will build a strong capacity in all of those around us to see their value and their worth and their ability to contribute. And that's really how we would build community. So we have to be consistent with that. And if we are consistent with it and we keep doing it, no matter what, then we'll change things. There was a lady I met not too long after somebody gave me that teaching, and it was at the Orlando conference that I went to. And she was a Black woman who was from the South, and she was really well put together. She had her own business. She was presenting on how she was helping unwed mothers who had children out of wedlock and were having a lot of difficulties in raising their children. And so she started a program that would help them. And so she was talking about this program. But she said, in the middle of telling about the program, I had asked Baha'u'llah to tell me, is this true? Is it true that if people knew that they were noble beings, that one teaching could transform them? And so I think he chose to have this woman answer this question for me. Because in the middle of her presentation, she told us that she had had 2 children before she was 16, and that she was a real drinker and partier, and that the Christians had told her that she was a sinner. And she said, and I was really good at it. and I could do it really well. And I had had these two children. My father was an alcoholic. My life was a disaster. And she said, I one day ran across a couple of Baha'is that were out inviting people to a meeting. And she said, at this invitation, they said they were having a party. And she said that was something I knew how to do. So I was going to go to the party. And so she said she took the invitation. And she said, but they told me in that invitation that they believed that every single person was a noble human being and that they could make their life successful. So she thought that was interesting. She didn't believe them at all. And she went to the party.
Did we just lose Gord? He's just trying to build up suspense in his story.
So are we?
We're back.
I disappeared.
Yeah, that was good. That was good drama.
Okay, well, can you hear me okay now? I'm
Yes,
very
Gord,
sorry.
You're good.
We have Starlink up here, which is supposed to be good thanks to Elon, but sometimes it disappears or something. I don't know what happens. So I was telling you that story. So she said that she went to this party, and when she went there, she suddenly realized there was no drugs, there was no alcohol. She didn't know what kind of party this was, but she said, because I was there, I just went around and I asked the various Baha'is, people that were there, do you think that I'm a noble being? And she said that she did that just more to entertain herself. And she said it was fascinating that they all did think that. And so she said she decided that night that she would register as a Baha'i because everybody thought that that's what she should do. So she did. And then she said she went home and she looked around, and there her father was an alcoholic. Her own kids were a disaster. She was a disaster. So what about my life was noble? Nothing was noble. So what the heck was I thinking? Forget about it. And then she continued to party. And she said for the next 10 years, she struggled through all of this. And she said, but at that point, 10 years later, she said all those 10 years, the Baha'i news was coming to her and she would read it once in a while, but she didn't connect at all with any of the community. And then after these 10 years, the Children's Aid was going to take away her children because they weren't going to school and they were moving in to take them. And she felt very desperate. And she said, and that was the point where she decided from that teaching that she would only from that point forward make decisions that had to do with what the noble thing was to do. So her first question in every decision she made from then was what would be the noble thing to do. So when it came to her children, she decided the noble thing to do was to make sure she got up in the morning, fed them breakfast, and got them to school. So she had to get rid of partying because she couldn't get up in the morning. And one by one, she put her whole life in order. And then after that time, she went back to, over that 10 years, she went back to the Baha'i community and she said, I was ready because now my life was noble. And everything about what I was doing was noble. And she said, I don't know why I'm telling you all of this, but I'm telling you to know that this one question of what is the noble thing to do helped me find the answers to what I had to do to improve my life. And then I knew that I was noble, and there was no doubt about it. And as I said, she was a successful businesswoman, was now helping other mothers that were in the same situation that she felt she was in at an earlier time. And she was a successful, her children had both gone off to university. She had raised them successfully and put her affairs in order. So I just tell that story because I think it's a simple approach, but it's one that perhaps in every situation, if we ask ourselves that question, it'd be good. I'm going to finish with this one writing from Shoghi Effendi. Who knows but that these few remaining fast fleeting years may not be pregnant with events of unimaginable magnitude, with ordeals more severe than any that humanity has as yet experienced, with conflicts more devastating than any which have preceded them. Dangers, however sinister, must at no time dim the radiance of their newborn faith. Strife and confusion, however bewildering, must never befog their vision. Tribulations, however afflictive, must never shatter their resolve. Denunciations, however clamorous, must never sap their loyalty. Upheavals, however cataclysmic, must never deflect their course. The present plan, embodying the budding hopes of a departed master, must be pursued, relentlessly pursued, whatever may befall them in the future, however distracting the crisis that may agitate their country or the world. Far from yielding in their resolve, far from growing oblivious of their task, they should at no time, however much buffeted by circumstances, forget that the synchronization of such world-shaking crisis with the progressive unfoldment and fruition of their divinely appointed task, unifying mankind, is itself the work of providence, the design of an inscrutable wisdom, and the purpose of an all-encompassing will, a will that directs and controls in its own mysterious way both the fortunes of the faith and the destinies of men. Such simultaneous processes of rise and of fall, of integration and of disintegration, of order and chaos, with their continuous and reciprocal reactions on each other, are but aspects of a greater plan, one and indivisible, whose source is God. Is the entire planet, and whose ultimate objectives are the unity of the human race and the peace of mankind. I thought when I read that it covers pretty much all of our excuses and all of the things that cause us to feel like our energy may be waning, but to have that promise that we must persevere with nobility and education, because the root cause of wrongdoing is ignorance. Thank you very much for, you may have questions or answers.